In this video, I'm going to discuss the Foundation 15 problem for Chapter 5, on activity-based costing. And the idea here, we'll go through the problem and you'll see more clearly what I'm talking about. But the idea here is that, the when we do a one plant-wide predetermined overhead rate, when we do one overhead rate for the whole plant, it might be a good way to apply or estimate overhead. Sometimes if you have a simple manufacturing process, one plant-wide overhead rate is fine. But when you have a more complex environment, sometimes one plant-wide overhead rate can average out the effects of other processes in which products consume overhead in different ways. And we don't want that sometimes. In other words, you might have a production process that has 3 steps. And in one of those steps, in 2 of the steps, pretty much both products that you make average out the same in terms of usage. But if in one of those, even if it's just one of those areas where you manufacture, one product that you do consumes more than the other in terms of that overhead activity, then if you do one plant-wide overhead rate, you're going to average out the effects of that. Whereas if you use something like activity-based costing, you're going to distinguish those things. Okay, so let's go ahead and do this problem so you can see what I'm saying. Hickory Company manufactures 2 products. They manufacture 14,000 units of Y and 6,000 units of Z. The company uses a plant-wide overhead rate based on direct labor hours. So this is just one rate. It is considering implementing an activity-based costing system that allocates all of the $684,000 of manufacturing overhead to 4 cost pools. So the contrast here is use one plant-wide overhead rate for everything, or use 4 rates based on 4 different cost pools or cost areas or activities. The following additional information is available for the company as a whole for products Y and Z. So the activities that are performed in the manufacture of these items is as follows. You have machining, then you also have an activity called machine setups. Every time we try to produce a batch of Y or a batch of Z, we got to set up the machinery different. Anytime we want to produce the product, we have different designs that are done, and then some general factory costs. And they're giving us the cost driver that they've chosen for each one of these. So for machining, it'll be machine hours, number of setups, and etc. And these are the estimated overhead costs. So overall, this should sum up to the $684,000 that are being discussed, and that does. Okay, here's the expected activity, and then the actual activity that occurred for those cost drivers. So let's go ahead and read the first question here. What is the company's plant-wide overhead rate? Okay, so we've done this before. Plant-wide predetermined overhead rate, and this is going to be very straightforward. It is going to be the estimated overhead divided by the estimated cost driver or activity. So in this case, we have 684,000, which we think is what overhead will be, and then we divide that by the 12,000. Since we're using direct labor hours as the plant-wide activity, then we have 12,000 hours right here. So we're going to use that 12,000 as the guide for one rate. And then that gives us $57 per direct labor hour. So in other words, as we produce any products of Y and Z, every time we incur one direct labor hour, we're going to estimate $57 worth of overhead. And that's an approach. Okay, so then question number 2 says, using the plant-wide overhead rate, how much manufacturing overhead cost is allocated to each product? All right, so let's go ahead and do that. Overhead applied, and that's going to be product Y. Here, I'll just put Y over here and then Z over here. And the direct labor hours involved for Y is 8,000, and then for Z it's 4,000. So this will be 8,000 hours and 4,000. Now keep in mind that when you're applying overhead, give me a second here, let me align this. So when you apply overhead, this is based on actual hours, okay? So these are actual direct labor hours. Now it just happens to be very, very conveniently that the actual sums up to be the same as the estimated amount here, okay? But you always got to remember that we do this ahead of time because we don't know this information. We only know this information later on. So we come up with an estimate to be able to apply little by little. So the way we do these problems, it's not apparent that we know this, we don't know this information ahead of time. But keep that in mind, okay? So the overhead rate is $57 and $57. So the applied overhead for each product is going to be the multiplication of that, which is 8,000 times 57. Okay, so let me clean this up a little bit here. So in the regular course of business, if we were applying overhead, we would have applied in total $456,000 to the production of all the Ys. And even though I'm doing this on a summary basis, like I'm doing it for the whole, what is this, the whole month? Or whatever this period might be, okay, I'm doing it. Usually what we do is we apply this overhead little by little. So it's not like we're gonna wait until production ends a month afterwards and we're gonna apply it all. No, we do that daily or, whatever. If you have several shifts in a company, you do it by shift, you apply the overhead. And the reason that is the case is because you wanna have timely cost data. Even if it's estimated cost data, you wanna have that timely cost data, okay? All right, so that's, this we've done before. So this is just kind of reviewing some of the things we've done before. And now we're going to start looking into activity-based costing. So that's where question number 3 comes in. And in question number 3, it says, what is the activity rate for machining? Actually, let's do all these 4 together. What's the activity rate for machining? In other words, what's the overhead rate for machining, machine setups, product design, and general factory? Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. So 3, I guess, through 6, we're going to call this overhead rates for each cost pool. All right, so we're going to have machining, machine setups, product design, and then finally just general factory. Okay, and the estimated overhead, not the actual, because remember when we come up with these rates, it's ahead of time. So the estimated amount was based on what they gave us on the top here, 200,000, and I'll just refer back here. So that's 200, 100, 84, and 3,000, and then these are the expected activities for which we have to come up with a rate. So we'll call this expected activity, and this one in particular is 10,000. So the predetermined overhead rate for that activity is going to be $2, I believe, or 20. There we go, 20. Okay. So what that means is for every hour that a product is being machined, we're going to allocate $20 of overhead to it. And the rest of these we could just do straight here. So this is $100,000. This one's $84,000. This is $300,000. Okay, then we have 200 setups. We have 2 product designs, and then 12,000 direct labor hours as before. So when we come up with these rates, that's what we get for every setup that we have for Y or for Z, we're going to charge or estimate $500 of overhead. And the other ones are explained similarly. Okay? So don't get lost in this whole thing. We could either just rely on one rate overall and apply it and come up with overhead amounts of this much. I'm going to highlight this yellow, and then I'm going to highlight this one green or blue. Okay? We can either come up with an estimate of overhead of 456,000 for Y and then 228 for Z. Or, here's the other thing. If we come up with different cost pools and different rates, then we can more precisely come up with the overhead applied, as opposed to averaging out overhead throughout the activities. Okay, so we'll see that in a minute. Okay, so that's 3 to 6. Let's see what 7 says. Which of the 4 activities is a batch level activity? So the batch level activity is the setups, machine setups. Okay, so it's important to understand what is a batch level activity and what is not, because when you have a cost pool like setups, okay, this is not, the costs incurred here are not influenced by the total number of units that you make. And if you were to use one plant-wide overhead rate, then it would be influenced by that. But in reality, it's not. The costs incurred for setups is based on, hey, how many setups have you had to do in order to produce the product? So imagine if I had a ton of setups for Z and only one for Y. Then if we were to just use one plant-wide overhead rate, we would be averaging out the effect of that. Whereas if we use the cost pools like this, we don't have to average it out. We actually specify which product receives more or less setups. Okay. Question number 8 says, which of the 4 activities is a product level activity? All right, so let's do that. And that's going to be our product design, right? It's specific to the product. And unless something is done to that product, there is no product design costs. So notice how there's only 2 here. Probably there's going to be one for X and one for Y and one for Z. Okay. Question number 9. Using the activity-based costing system, how much total manufacturing overhead costs would be assigned to product Y and to product Z? So let's go ahead and do that right now. Let's do both products. So 9 and 10 will do. Here's 9. And we're going to compare it to this number here in yellow and blue. 9. Let me see if I can use a similar format so that we can more easily see it. So I'm going to call this overhead applied. Oh wait, this is 9 and 10. Overhead applied using activity-based costing. And I'm going to call this one, number 2, overhead applied using one plant-wide overhead rate. Okay, so we're going to contrast these two. For machining, I guess I'll use this setup right here since there's 4 of them. For machining here, and then this is product Y, and then we'll use Z here. So we are told that for product Y, the actual amount of machine hours was 7,000. So I'm going to go in here and say 7,000 hours times the rate per hour, which is $20. Okay, and that'll give us $140,000 for product Y. So let me be clear here. Let me put a little box so we don't mix them up. And then same here. Okay, then for machine setups, we're told that we had to set up for product Y 50 times. But notice how for product Z, we had to set up way more times. Okay, so we're going to go in here And just go ahead and do the math real quick. 50 times 500, and that's $25,000. And I should put some dollar signs in here so it's not as sloppy. I apologize. Okay. Product design, each one of them had one, so that's evenly spread out. So 1 times $42,000. So there's no differential with that one because we just basically split the cost between the two of them. I should be doing this side too. 3,000, so we can contrast. This is 3,000 because it's 3,000 machine hours times 20, and that is $60,000. Okay. So notice how now, by doing the activity-based costing, we can appreciate, and not just appreciate, but mathematically apply overhead in a more fair fashion. If if product Y consumes way more machining, then let's assign more of that machining cost to product Y and less to product Z. Whereas maybe under this approach, we might just, well, actually, let me see. Yeah, actually, under this approach, we might have just been averaging that effect out because of the fact that our only cost driver was direct labor hours. So here, we're being more precise about that. This is 150 times 500. So this ends up being $75,000. Bear with me here. All right, and then same thing, this is the same. And then for general factory, this is the one that's direct labor hours, so this is 8,000 hours like before, times 25. This is coming right from here. And that gives us 200,000. And then this one is 4,000 hours. That's given to us. This is actual hours, actual direct labor hours, times 25. And then that gives us $100,000. Now let's look at the difference here. And this is what's important. I think sometimes people get bogged down in the math, and what I want you to realize is that that's just a means to an end. Okay, what we really want to know is how are we allocating overhead? Like, how much precision are we putting into it? Because at the end of the day, the more precision you put into the allocation of overhead, the better you will your product will be priced. Because the better you know the true cost of your product, the better you can make decisions on pricing. So contrast this. Look, if we would have done the one rate for everything, right? The one plant-wide overhead rate, we would have assigned $456,000 of overhead to Y. Using a more precise method where we distinguish more what kind of processes happen in the manufacture of Y, we end up allocating $407,000 instead of $456,000. And that's important because this is the overhead that's going to be used to determine the cost of the item. So if you overestimate Y by roughly 50 grand, and let's say that this is the more correct overhead applied amount, and you use this, you might be pricing your product too high, thinking that you need to sell it for a certain amount in order to make money, when in fact you could have sold it for less if you would have done a better estimate of overhead. Okay, and the opposite is true here. If one product is being over applied, then the other one might be under applied. So you might sell this product cheap when in fact that price that you're selling it at might not be the right price. You might have to charge a little bit more for that product because the more precise overhead is higher than what you initially thought. Okay, so kind of a quick little moral here is there is a limit as to how crazy you're going to go with different rates, right? But in general, for significant amounts, which in this case we have 200,000, 100,000, and 84 for each one of those cost pools, if each product consumes the overhead from these pools differently, then it is worth breaking it down like this to get a more precise estimate of overhead. Okay? Let's move to the next question, which is 11. Using the plant-wide overhead rate, what percentage of the total overhead cost is allocated to product Y, and what percentage is allocated to product Z? And then the questions that follow sort of get at that same point. Okay, if you notice, look, 11 is one plant-wide overhead rate. So we're going to have one amount of overhead applied overall. And what percentage of this is the total amount, okay? And then here, we're just going to, for 12, 13, 14, and 15, they're asking what percentage is these constructs of the total amount. So I think we should just do all of them together here. This is going to be 11 through 15. Okay, so we'll start here. The plant-wide overhead, I'm going to call it one plant-wide overhead rate. We'll do that, and we'll write here applied overhead. And then for the activity-based costing system, so let me be a little bit nicer here in terms of how I do this. And for activity-based costing, we have, of course, four items: machine. Excuse me. Let me just copy these down. And then a total here, we'll put applied overhead total. Okay. So for product Y, let me do a little space here. I'm going to say for product Y, and then for product Z over here. So for product Y, we applied 456, I believe. Yes, so this is the overhead rate, so that's 456. As a matter of fact, let me just copy this. And this will be this one here. And then these right here, I could just copy them as well. And we're just going to analyze on a percentage basis what's going on here, okay? And you'll see what I mean in a second here. Okay, so out of the total, here's total overhead applied. Out of this total, and then out of these totals here, okay, and this also is 684, okay, so we applied 684 under one rate approach. We apply 684 under the multiple rate approach, or activity-based costing, to be more precise. So maybe I should sum this up to confirm that. There it is. Okay, but here's what we're interested in, okay? Out of the total 684, 456 was applied to Y. And I should have spaced this out a little bit. Move this so it to the right. Okay, there we go. So out of the total 684, 456 was applied to Y. So let's see what percentage of the total was applied to Y. Okay, they don't like something. Sorry, I think I had a circular formula there, but here we go. So this 456, we want to know what percentage of it is, what percentage of 684 it is. So that's 67% roughly. Let me simplify this a little bit. There we go. And the same thing for the other values here. Oops. And here's where we want to start appreciating what's going on. Let me copy this as well. Oops, this did not work because I have to refer to this one. All right, so bear with me here while I do this. Okay, so look, if we use the plant-wide overhead rate, we're basically saying that 67% of the overhead should go to product Y. And that's also reflected here when we use that cost driver to apply only the portion that belongs to general factor, or $200,000. But when we use one rate, we basically assume that the relationship for all other things is like this, 2/3 and 1/3. Whereas if we use activity-based costing, we can more precisely say, okay, this might be the relationship for general factory activities, okay? But when it comes to, for example, machine setups, it really is product Z that consumes way more, so we should give way more, in this case 3/4 of that overhead cost, to machine Z. Same thing here, for example. The product design, instead of averaging out more of this $84,000 to Y when we do this approach, the one plant-wide overhead rate, we say no, let's use 50-50 on this one. Okay, so I think you can appreciate that once we start detailing how our products consume overhead more precisely, then we can come up with a much better way of estimating how much overhead goes to that product. And you know, we concentrate a lot on the overhead amount. Like in this case, we apply this amount. The overhead applied over here is this amount. And we don't talk much about direct materials, but let's just kind of think about this. Look, here's the total cost for Y, and here's the total cost for Z. We know that, and this is just kind of so you don't lose track of what we're doing. We know direct materials and direct labor are a part of it, but what we concentrate on is estimating overhead. So if we were using ABC, we would say that the amount that's estimated is 407 over here, and then the amount for Z is 277. Okay, we do a lot of effort towards estimating these amounts, and we barely talk about how we come up with these values for direct materials and direct labor. And the reason that's the case is because this is very easy to determine. Okay, if you have to buy products for an item you're making, the cost of direct materials can be directly traced to that product. So we can easily just look at the invoices and say we spent whatever amount it is on materials. Same thing for direct labor. This is traceable directly to the product Y or Z. So whatever hours we pay our employees to do that, that's really not an issue. So whatever these two amounts are, those are easily determinable. It's this one right here that is hard to determine because these things are not directly traceable to the product, okay? Keep that in mind. And when you sum up these three items, that's your total cost of the product that you're selling. And that's why it is important to understand that this will always pretty much be on the money. This will be precise. You don't have to estimate anything. But this one right here, we need to estimate ahead of time. Otherwise, we won't know how to price our products, or we won't know an estimated cost for the product until later on. And that doesn't work. We need estimated cost data ahead of time on a timely basis so we can price our goods. All right, this concludes the video on activity-based costing.